One fleeting touch, one secret moment, and somehow, it never left me. The cafe was quiet that morning, sunlight spilling softly across worn wooden tables. I had come seeking nothing more than a corner to think, the comforting hum of people in the background. And yet, when she walked in, it felt like the world shifted just slightly, not in some dramatic cinematic way, but in that subtle, almost imperceptible way that makes you notice everything around her. She was standing by the counter, ordering coffee, and I couldn't help but notice the effortless grace in her movements. She had the poise of someone entirely comfortable in her own skin, yet there was a quiet vulnerability in her eyes that drew me in. Her hair, a rich chestnut, fell softly over her shoulders, and when she tucked a strand behind her ear, I realized I was holding my breath. The faint scent of her perfume, warm, slightly floral, lingered in the air long after she passed. I pretended to focus on my notebook, but every so often, my eyes betrayed me, darting to her as she moved through the cafe. She smiled at the barista, a slow, gentle curve of her lips that seemed to radiate warmth. And then, for a moment, our hands brushed as she reached for a menu tucked near the counter. It was brief, a second at most, but the spark it left behind was undeniable. The warmth of her fingers against mine was subtle, electric, and fleeting, like the echo of something important I didn't yet understand. I wanted to speak, to say something clever or memorable, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I offered a polite nod, a small acknowledgement that somehow felt significant. She returned the gesture, her eyes meeting mine for just a heartbeat longer than polite conversation required. There was something in that glance, curiosity, recognition, maybe even a hint of unspoken understanding, that made my chest tighten. She took a seat by the window, the light catching her features in a way that made her seem almost luminous, yet completely real. I watched from across the room, noting how she gently cradled her cup in both hands, as if drawing warmth not just from the coffee, but from the moment itself. Her presence was quiet but commanding. It was impossible not to notice, impossible not to feel drawn toward her. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, she was gone. A simple nod goodbye to the barista, a gentle smile, and she disappeared out the door, leaving a faint trace of perfume and a lingering sense of something unfinished. My notebook remained open, but the words I had planned to write had vanished. All I could think about was her, the subtle elegance of her gestures, the quiet pull of her gaze, and the strange electric anticipation that had taken root in me. That morning I didn't know her name, and she didn't know mine. But in the way certain moments linger long after they've passed, I knew this encounter would not be easily forgotten. Something in that brief exchange, something unspoken and delicate, had planted a seed, one that would quietly pull me back over and over, without me even realizing it. The cafe encounter had ended, but it clung to me like a soft echo I couldn't shake. I walked the streets afterward, the winter sunlight casting long shadows, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying her movements, the quiet grace in the way she carried herself. I found myself recalling the small details I hadn't noticed at first, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened, the way her fingers lingered on her coffee cup, the subtle laugh that didn't demand attention but made the room feel warmer. It was as if every small motion had been a note in a song I didn't yet know the melody of. I tried to focus on work, on the usual routines of life, but every time my thoughts drifted, her presence filled the space. I remembered the brush of our hands, that fleeting moment that had seemed insignificant to anyone else. Yet in my memory, it was electric, her fingers light against mine, a spark that lingered far longer than any accidental touch should. My chest tightened every time I imagined it. I caught myself imagining conversations that hadn't happened yet. What would it be like to speak to her again? To hear her voice more clearly? To understand the thoughts behind those attentive, observant eyes? There was a temptation to imagine more, to let my mind wander to a closeness I knew I wasn't ready to pursue, a desire both thrilling and terrifying in its intensity. Even ordinary things reminded me of her. The soft hum of the cafe in the morning, the scent of roasted coffee beans, the way sunlight fell on a familiar street corner. Each small detail became a thread connecting me back to that secret, silent pull. It was maddening, intoxicating. I realized how deeply I had noticed her presence, how much the brief encounter had unsettled my sense of normalcy, leaving a quiet ache in its wake. There was also curiosity, a gentle, respectful curiosity. Who was she beyond that graceful exterior? What quiet sorrows or joys shaped the warmth she exuded? I began to wonder about the layers beneath her confident, serene demeanor, the hidden parts that only someone paying attention might ever see. Each imagined layer drew me closer in thought, though I still respected the boundaries I hadn't yet crossed. At night, I lay awake thinking about her. It wasn't longing in the sharp, desperate sense. It was something more tender, a quiet fascination, a recognition that even in a fleeting encounter, something important had shifted. I traced the memory of her smile, the way she moved through the cafe with effortless ease, and I felt an ache I didn't want to name. That secret moment, the brush of our hands, the shared glance, had planted itself firmly in my mind. It had become a quiet compass, subtly guiding my attention, shaping my thoughts, reminding me that some connections were not meant to be rushed or understood immediately. They simply existed, lingering like sunlight on the skin, warm and gentle, refusing to fade. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I would search for it again, for her again, even if I didn't fully understand why. That moment, so small yet so profound, had pulled me into a story I wasn't yet ready to begin, but I could no longer ignore. It seemed the universe had a strange sense of humor. Just when I thought that morning, that fleeting moment in the cafe, had been a one-time anomaly, I found myself seeing her again. Not in some contrived way, not in a coincidence that felt forced, but in the small, everyday spaces where life quietly unfolded. The first time it was at a bookstore. I had wandered down a quiet aisle, fingers trailing over worn spines, and there she was, flipping through a novel with that same calm focus, that same subtle elegance that had lodged itself in my mind. She hadn't noticed me at first, and I took a moment just to watch. The tilt of her head, the careful way she turned the pages, the soft hum she made when she read aloud to herself, almost imperceptibly. I felt a familiar warmth in my chest, a strange mixture of anticipation and hesitation. When our eyes met briefly, I caught the faintest flicker of recognition in her gaze. Her lips curved in a polite, almost shy smile, and my heart gave an unsteady leap. The memory of our cafe encounter returned, that gentle brush of hands, the momentary spark that had lingered far longer than either of us could have expected. Over the following weeks, these unplanned meetings became almost a pattern. At a park, she was walking slowly along the path, a book tucked under her arm, the light catching her hair in a soft halo. At a gallery, she lingered by a painting, lost in thought, while I wandered nearby, pretending to examine the art while secretly noting her expressions. Each encounter was brief, polite, yet each left a trace, a warmth, a tension, a small ache that refused to dissipate. Physical proximity began to take on meaning. Shoulders brushing when passing on narrow paths, the accidental touch of hands while reaching for the same item, standing side by side on park benches with just enough closeness to feel the heat of her presence. Each gesture was subtle, fleeting, yet electric, and it left my senses heightened. I found myself acutely aware of her scent, the soft, comforting hint of vanilla and warmth, the gentle cadence of her laugh, and the way her gaze seemed to hold unspoken questions, curiosity, and something deeper, more personal. And yet, there was hesitation on both sides. Social boundaries, age differences, and unspoken caution held us at arm's length. There was a quiet understanding, almost a tacit agreement, that the connection we were feeling was delicate and rare, meant to be explored gently without rushing. Every shared glance, every fleeting touch, carried weight precisely because it was restrained. In those moments, I began to understand her in ways that went beyond appearances. Small gestures spoke volumes. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when nervous, the way she listened intently without interrupting, the subtle lift of an eyebrow when something intrigued her. Each encounter deepened my curiosity and admiration, and with it, the tension between us grew stronger. By now, I realized something undeniable. Every time I saw her, my chest tightened in a way that was equal parts fear and longing. I was beginning to understand that these unexpected encounters were no longer coincidences. They were becoming the threads of a story quietly weaving itself between us, and I was powerless not to follow where it led. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day where the world feels softened, muted, and intimate. I had ducked into a small cafe to escape the drizzle, shaking off the chill, when I saw her again. She was seated by the window, a delicate porcelain cup cradled between her hands, eyes tracing the raindrops as they slid down the glass. There was a certain tranquility about her in that moment, a stillness that made the space around her feel warmer, somehow safer. Our conversation began casually, a comment about the weather, a shared smile over a passing observation. But gradually the words deepened. She spoke of her work, the people she cared for, the subtle pressures of life that often went unseen. I found myself sharing in return, cautiously at first, then with a growing sense of ease. There was no rush, no need for performance, just the quiet flow of honesty between two people discovering a rare connection. I noticed the small, intimate gestures that spoke louder than words. When she laughed, she touched her collarbone lightly, as if grounding herself in the moment. When I mentioned something that resonated, her hand brushed against mine on the table, fleeting and accidental, yet leaving a warmth that lingered long after it had passed. The cafe felt smaller, cozier, as if the world beyond those walls had receded, leaving just the two of us suspended in time. She spoke of vulnerability in a way I hadn't expected, a subtle acknowledgement of past disappointments, the quiet weight of responsibilities, the longing for someone who truly sees you. And in her openness, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. There was a trust forming, fragile yet profound, that made each glance, each touch, carry meaning. Her hand rested briefly near mine, a silent gesture of connection, and I felt the quiet steadiness of her presence seep into me. There was an unspoken rhythm to our conversation. Pauses that were comfortable, moments where neither of us spoke, yet communication happened all the same. A tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened, the small shift of her body toward mine on the narrow bench. Each subtle movement amplified the tension, that delicate line between friendship and something more. It wasn't urgent or overwhelming, but it was undeniable. By the time we parted, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening with reflected light. We walked together for a few blocks, side by side, just close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed. When our hands touched accidentally, it lingered, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken connection we were exploring. There was a hesitancy in both of us, a recognition that what we were feeling was profound yet needed patience, respect, and time. That afternoon, I realized that our connection wasn't defined by grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It existed in the small moments, in the gentle closeness, in the quiet trust building between us. And as I watched her walk away, I felt it. The secret, simmering pull of something I couldn't yet name, yet already knew would follow me, quietly, insistently, into the days to come. It was a chilly evening, the kind where the air bites softly at your skin, and every step feels like a reminder of the world outside. I had been walking through the quiet streets after work, lost in thought, when I saw her again, waiting under the soft glow of a street lamp. She looked as effortless as ever, her coat wrapped snugly around her, scarf draped just so, and her hair catching the faint light in soft waves. Our eyes met, and I felt that familiar tug in my chest, a quiet pull that always left me slightly off balance, yet entirely present in the moment. We walked together, side by side, letting the silence stretch comfortably. The sound of our footsteps echoed softly on the pavement, mingling with the distant hum of city life. At one point, I instinctively shifted closer to avoid the cold wind, and she mirrored the movement. Our shoulders brushed, fleetingly at first, but there was a subtle warmth in that contact that lingered far longer than it should have. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, natural, like two elements fitting together in a quiet rhythm we both recognized. Then it happened, the moment that would etch itself permanently into memory. We stopped at a small park, the benches glistening faintly from the recent drizzle. She turned to look at something in the distance, and I stepped closer, instinctively. Our hands met, not in a deliberate gesture, but almost accidentally, fingers brushing, then intertwining. There was a pause, an inhalation, a quiet acknowledgement that this fleeting touch held more weight than either of us had dared to admit. Her hand was warm against mine, the skin soft, reassuring, grounding. I felt her pulse faintly, a steady rhythm that echoed in the space between us. My own heartbeat quickened, yet there was no panic, only a deep, steady surge of emotion that left me lightheaded and profoundly aware of her presence. She didn't pull away, and neither did I. Instead, our proximity grew slightly, her shoulder brushing mine as we both leaned subtly into the shared warmth of closeness. Her gaze met mine, lingering longer than usual, filled with unspoken understanding and curiosity. I noticed the subtle lift of her eyebrows, the slight parting of her lips, the way her eyes glimmered with something tender and vulnerable. In that quiet, suspended moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. The rustle of leaves, the distant city lights, and the simple, undeniable connection pulsing between our fingertips. We didn't speak. Words would have felt unnecessary, even intrusive. Instead, there was a silent conversation in every glance, every slight shift, every heartbeat shared in that space. It was brief, delicate, and entirely intimate. A secret moment that belonged only to us, a fragment of time I knew I would return to again and again in memory. When we finally pulled back slightly, our hands reluctantly separating, I felt a strange ache of longing mixed with gratitude. That secret moment, the touch, the warmth, the shared stillness, had revealed something profound. It wasn't just attraction. It was understanding, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement that something rare was unfolding between us. Even as we walked away, side by side but slightly apart, I carried it with me. That gentle, electric memory that would continue to pull me back, over and over, in ways I could neither resist nor fully comprehend. The days after that evening felt strangely elongated, as if time itself was holding its breath. Everywhere I went, the memory of that secret moment clung to me. The warmth of her hand against mine, the faint pressure of our shoulders brushing, the unspoken acknowledgement that something rare had shifted between us. I tried to focus on routine, on work, on the familiar rhythm of life, but my mind kept wandering back to her. Every mundane task, making coffee, walking down a familiar street, even hearing the hum of distant traffic, carried the echo of that fleeting intimacy. I found myself replaying it endlessly, the way her fingers had intertwined with mine so naturally, as if we had done it countless times before. The gentle pressure of her warmth against me, grounding yet electrifying. The way her eyes had held mine, soft, curious, and quietly vulnerable, revealing more than words ever could. Each detail was burned into memory, vivid, alive, impossible to forget. And yet, along with the thrill came hesitation. I couldn't ignore the barriers, both real and imagined. The age difference, though irrelevant to the pull I felt, still whispered caution into my mind. I worried about appearances, about how such a connection might be judged, about whether I was ready for something so emotionally intense. She, too, I imagined, must have her own hesitations, her own questions about what this could mean. That made the connection feel simultaneously precious and fragile. Something to cherish, but something not to rush. I caught myself imagining what might have happened if the moment had lasted longer, if I had dared to lean closer, to speak, to let the unspoken tension stretch a little further. But I knew that part of its power lay in its restraint. It had been fleeting, private, perfect in its subtlety. The memory itself carried a quiet intimacy that no words or gestures could improve. And yet, the ache of longing persisted, a soft pull at my chest that reminded me that desire and hesitation were intertwined in ways I hadn't expected. I began noticing her in the world around me in small, almost instinctive ways. A familiar scarf, the scent of vanilla lingering in the air, the tilt of someone's head that reminded me of her movements. I realized that this connection wasn't limited to our encounters. It had seeped into my perception of the world, coloring ordinary moments with a warmth and awareness I hadn't felt before. It was subtle, almost painful in its quiet intensity, and entirely captivating. Despite the hesitation, despite the lingering uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. That secret moment had shown me something profound, a depth of connection I hadn't known I could feel so quickly, so fully. It had awakened a careful hope, a curiosity about what might develop if patience and honesty guided the way. And so I waited, not in despair, but in a quiet, observant longing. Each thought of her, each memory of our touch, became a tether, pulling me toward a possibility I could not yet name, but one I was learning to respect, savor, and quietly pursue. That secret moment had become a compass, guiding me toward the inevitable question. Could we find a way to explore this bond, gently, honestly, and fully? The afternoon sun had a golden softness that seemed to linger longer than usual, spilling across the park where we met. It was quiet, almost serene, with the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing. She was already there when I arrived, seated on the bench we had unconsciously claimed over the past weeks. Her presence felt familiar, comforting, and yet still capable of stirring that quiet, magnetic pull in my chest. This time, there was no hesitation, only a shared, unspoken understanding. As I approached, she lifted her eyes toward me, a small, knowing smile curving her lips. I noticed the gentle warmth in her gaze, the way her posture relaxed as if she had been expecting me. Our connection, built over countless small encounters, brief touches, and lingering looks, felt tangible now, like a thread that had been gradually woven between us, finally strong enough to support the weight of acknowledgement. We walked together slowly, side by side, letting the silence flow naturally. There was no need for words at every moment. The quiet was comfortable, intimate. When we reached the bench, she motioned for me to sit close. I hesitated for the briefest second, but the memory of our past encounters, the accidental touches, the fleeting glances, urged me forward. As I settled beside her, our shoulders brushed, a touch that was both familiar and electrifying. She turned toward me, and this time, there was no accidental contact, only intentional closeness. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, without tension or uncertainty. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse, and a deep sense of connection that had grown quietly over time. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder, a gesture so simple yet profoundly intimate, and I instinctively leaned toward her, feeling the comforting weight of her presence. Our conversation flowed gently, intimate without pressure. We shared thoughts, small dreams, and quiet reflections, each word deepening the trust and understanding between us. Occasionally, our fingers would squeeze gently, or her hand would brush against mine, reinforcing the subtle intimacy that had been building since that first secret moment. There was a natural ease to it, a harmony born of patience, respect, and shared vulnerability. The world around us seemed to fade, leaving only the two of us and the warmth we carried. I realized that this was the culmination of every brush of hands, every lingering glance, every accidental closeness that had quietly shaped our bond. The age difference, the hesitations, the uncertainties, they all felt secondary to the undeniable connection that had grown between us. As we finally stood to leave, our hands remained intertwined, a quiet promise of continuity, of slow, steady growth. She smiled up at me, and I smiled back, feeling a profound contentment. That secret moment, the touch that had first ignited something unspoken, was no longer just a memory. It had become the foundation for a bond that was gentle, respectful, and deeply intimate. Walking side by side, I knew that this was just the beginning. The pull of that first secret moment had led us here, and now, with hearts quietly aligned and hands entwined, the story of us could continue, warm, tender, and enduring. If that secret moment tugged at your heart like it did mine, don't forget to share, and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that linger long after the story ends. Comment below. Have you ever experienced a moment that quietly changed everything?